Back in 2021, NASA was forced to investigate renaming the James Webb Telescope after anti-LGBTQ+ claims by astronomers who argued that the flagship observatory was memorializing discriminations. The topic came up again in 2022, and NASA has recently decided that the telescope will be retaining its controversial name. This is because they stated that they didn't find any evidence that matched with the claims that had been made. Here's everything we know about the story. In 2021, reports alleged that James Webb, after whom the flagship astronomical observatory had been named, was involved in the persecution of gay people. If these reports were proven true, then keeping Webb's name on the $8.8 billion telescope would glorify bigotry and anti-LGBTQ+ sentiments. But others said that there wasn't enough evidence against Webb, who had served as the head of NASA from 1961 to 1968, and that any judgment should be withheld until the agency had finished conducting a thorough internal investigation. Said reports were brought to light in May 2021 by 4 prominent astronomers who also launched a petition to change the telescope's name. They got 1,250 signatories, including scientists who had been awarded observing time on the telescope. In response, NASA's acting chief historian Brian Odom started working with a non-agency historian to review the archives about Webb's policies and actions. Paul Hertz, head of the organization's astrophysics division, stated, "We must be transparent with the community and with the public for the rationale for whichever decision we make." Let's talk a bit more about James Webb and the basis of these allegations. The JWST was named after Webb in 2002 by former NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe when the telescope was still in its early stages of development. The decision was a unilateral one that surprised many because NASA's telescopes are normally named only after scientists. Meanwhile, Webb was a bureaucrat with a handful of administrative roles in the US government. O'Keefe had chosen the name to honor Webb because he had advocated for science being kept as a part of NASA's portfolio back in the 60s. He said that he wasn't aware of any accusations against Webb when he chose the name. In the 40s, when Webb was just beginning his career with the government, homosexual employees were systematically being removed from their workplaces because of their sexual orientations. This was a campaign that was backed by many members of Congress at the time. The period became known as the Lavender Scare. According to the former astronomers who headed the renaming petition, Webb worked for the State Department as an undersecretary and passed a set of memos discussing what was referred to as the problem of homosexuals and sex perverts to a senator responsible for heading the persecution. The same astronomers cited records from the U.S. National Archives by Adrian Lucy, an astronomer at Columbia University in NYC, which showed that Webb had planned and participated in meetings, which was when he handed over the homophobic material. They also noted that as a leader, Webb was responsible for the discriminatory policies enacted at his agency, and also referred to the case of Clifford Norton, who was fired from NASA because he was suspected to be gay in 1963, back when Webb was administrator. After the first investigation, NASA decided not to rename the observatory. They said that they'd found no evidence to support the allegations against Webb. The decision itself, and the lack of transparency that came with it, upset many astronomers. One such astronomer stated that they were disappointed and that it was difficult for them to respect the decision because they hadn't been told about the factors that had been considered while making it. Even though a NASA official had said that the agency would be transparent, no final report was released on the findings. Odom insisted that under the circumstances presented by COVID, they had been as thorough and objective as possible. He said that a number of archivists had gone through the organization's internal records, interviewed historians who had studied with Webb, and even hired an external historian to explore Webb's career at other government agencies. But it's relevant to note that repositories like the National Archives in Washington and the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum in Missouri were closed because of the pandemic, and Odom's team was not able to study the undigitized materials from there. Astronomers felt like for all the institution's talk of equality and diversity, they didn't appear to be very concerned about the pertinent issue. One of the astronomers stated that in refusing to confront history, they were refusing to shed light on the oppression that historically marginalized groups face. Fast forward to 2022, and NASA is still sticking to its previous decision. According to a statement announced in a report released by NASA officials, they had found no evidence to directly link Webb to any actions, or even to follow up related to the firing of anyone for their sexual orientation. And based on the available evidence, they weren't going to be changing the name of the JWSP. They argued against the fact that Webb bore the responsibility for everything he was being accused of. Also, that there was no way that he could have intervened in standard government policies and routine to prevent the firing of certain people for whatever reason, especially because hardly anyone was standing up and fighting for gay people's rights back then. It was further explained that nobody, not even gay people, were fighting for that in the 50s. employees, so it was unfair to expect that of Webb. They continued to talk about how if they were to fault Webb for the Lavender Scare, then they would have had to change the names of many things who hadn't been particularly active in persecuting homosexuals, but hadn't stood up for them either. Odom released another lighthearted statement later stating, "Don't change the name at this point. Stop naming things after people." But critics of the telescope's name aren't buying it. They have responded saying that NASA's statements are heavily reliant on selective historical reading, where they're only looking for something that explicitly states that James Webb did, said, or supported the things they were accusing him of, which they should have been digging deeper. They noted that since NASA had found evidence that suggested that Webb continued to occupy positions of power because of his competence, then it's also highly likely that he was aware of the security practices at his agency, and that he did, in fact, have the power to do something about it. The same critics added that they find it kind of hypocritical of NASA to insist on crediting Webb for the exciting things that happened under his leadership, but refuse to find him culpable for the problems that happened at the same time, which is a fair argument. They have also argued that NASA's stance on the matter appears to be implying that managers and heads of the organization aren't necessarily responsible for regulating homophobia or any other kind of discrimination in the workplace, which again is a pretty dangerous precedent to set. Odom says he understands the people's sentiments, but stands by the fact that there isn't sufficient evidence to back the allegations. After the latest decision that confirmed that the telescopes would not be changed, Odom acknowledges that the persecution of gay government workers was a dark chapter in American history. Also, that he understands that the past can have a significant impact on the present. At the same time, though, he says, we have to go where the evidence takes us. According to Odom, even if there's no evidence that Webb led efforts to weed out gay people from the government, understanding that part of history and the long-lasting damage it did to people's lives is important to consider as NASA moves forward. NASA also tries to have deeper and more open conversations about diversity, equality, accountability, inclusion, and accessibility. But this move seems a little off regardless. The scientific community is still discontent, and NASA is struggling with the politics surrounding the decision. For example, many internal employees have come out with public criticism regarding the organization, with people like Wolkowitz, one of the astronomers responsible for bringing up the petition, resigning from the Astrophysics Advisory Committee. Additionally, scientific societies have also brought pressure from their side. The Royal Astronomical Society in London, for example, has adopted a policy, a temporary one so far, to exclusively utilize only the JWST acronym in all its publications, rather than using the full name. The American Astronomical Society has also announced that it won't require JWST to be spelled out on first reference in its journals. That's a departure from its regular policy on acronyms. One thing's for sure, this controversy is definitely going to have broader implications for how NASA will name objects going forward. The agency has already made changes to its internal guidance on naming missions and buildings. Additionally, they have also decided to convene a committee that includes a historian who will be conducting a thorough historical and legal review before names are chosen and finalized. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think NASA should be naming things and missions after people? Do you think they should have changed the name of the JWST? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.